Hi, and welcome back to Essential Beliefs. I want us to remember that these fundamental truths that we're looking at, and they come from God, but they're not limited to Christians or the church. And I think sometimes because in our nation, we kind of pride ourselves as a nation of separating church and state, that we look at two sets of reality. One is what we live by as Christians, or in the Old Testament, what they live by as Jews, and then what the rest of the world lives by. Or we look at ourselves as Christians living under the New Testament versus folks who are just living in the world under whatever laws that they live under, depending on the nation or the jurisdiction, etc. And what that creates is kind of a dualism. And I want to remind us that the things that God teaches are not just for Christians, they're not just for Jews. It's a way to live. The wisdom literature of the Old Testament is not just God telling Israel what to do. It is God's wisdom being revealed to mankind. And that's true of the statements that we've looked at, these essential beliefs of eye for an eye, do unto others you would have them do unto you. As you sow, so you shall reap. And the same is true for the essential belief that we're going to be looking at a little more closely today, and that is a house divided against itself cannot stand. Now, this is a truism. In fact, if you look at the history of the world, it's just full of nation overturning nation and nation going to war with nation, or nations with revolutions. Our history started out with a revolution against the nation that used to have jurisdiction over us, Britain, and we undertook a revolution to separate ourselves because we did not respect their leadership. In fact, one of the main phrases was taxation without representation. The whole world is full of those histories, and one of the things that I want us to do is to look a little more deeply at, one, what establishes a nation, what creates unity in a nation, and then what undermines it and leads to the death of a nation or the death of a kingdom or an empire or whatever. And that's very important, not just looking at nations, but it's important looking at families. It's important looking at churches even. And I think sometimes we have a tendency, especially in the United States, of looking at our unity based upon kind of a romanticized view of the past. Each war since World War II, there has been less popular support. There's less ideological congruence between the leaders and the people who are actually called upon to die. Now, when that becomes the case, what happens is those who you depend upon to fight, those you depend upon to either defend your freedom or whatever, when they have a ideological disagreement with their leadership, they're not as bound to want to fight, especially to give their lives. I talked to you about North Korea. One of the issues that I think leaders, like in nations like North Korea, Russia, places like that, is that folks don't necessarily buy into the ideology of the ruler. He doesn't understand that. So when he calls upon them to go to war for him, you're going to find them very less motivated. You see, they don't believe in the ideals. They don't believe in, and those ideals have to transcend the government that's in power. If you look in the Second World War, Germans were less motivated. It was not difficult to get Germans to surrender. Because they had had a massive regime change in a very short amount of time. And honestly, although they were following orders, they didn't know how they felt about it. Now you look at Russians during World War II, they tended to have a greater motivation, but they were defending their homeland. But the Japanese had the most dedication. We had suicide pilots among the Japanese because the people believed in not just the leadership, but the ideologies of what the nation stood for, the morality of the nation, the ancestors, all of those kinds of things. And they were a very formidable opponent because they weren't just fighting for Emperor Hirohito or for Japan. It was for all the things that it represented that each one of them had internalized to the point that their honor, their personal honor, was at stake. I think modern leaders in the United States look back on the courage of the military from the past, but they forget why those folks were so courageous. You see, folks that fought in World War II were fighting for God and country, God and King. Even though it was not on the U.S. soil, it was understood that we're here to protect not just an ideological government, but the freedom that we had all worked for based on Judeo-Christian heritage that gave to each person a sense of duty, responsibility, even mission. And that transcends motivation of government. It's hard to get an army to fight when you've got a gun to the back of their head. Now, I want us to look at, because this idea of a house divided can't stand, which is true on every strata of however you want to look at associations of people, it's a universal truth. We're going to start at nations, and then we're going to eventually go to the church, because as we've seen in the last 30 years, a lot of church division. And I want us to look a little more deeply. How do you know when a house is divided? We'll get to that in a moment. How do nations fall? It's basically one of two ways. One is revolution, in which the folks inside the nation have lost trust in their leadership, or they have viewed their leadership as taking a different direction than the populace has, that we're not working in concert with one another. We don't have the same ideals, same philosophies, things like that. The other way is basically through conquest, which is being taken over by another nation or a superior force. But one of the things that I want you to understand, generally in conquest, which includes assimilation, and that is just absorbing an empire into yours, kind of like what the Romans did with the Greeks. Within conquest, there is also this sense of revolution. And what I mean by that is what I just talked about. I'm not going to go to war to protect this ideology. My dad more than once made this statement when he learned about so many of the ethics that the United States was adopting. He would say, I didn't go to World War II to defend this. I didn't go to World War II to protect this. So what he saw as an abuse of freedom in the United States undermined what would have been his willingness to go back to war, if you understand what I'm saying. So when he was at war, he was not just fighting for the laws of the United States, for the territory of the United States. He was fighting for the freedoms which had been won through God and country. And that was very important to him. Revolution is when a nation is divided. The leadership tends to be aloof from the populace. There is not agreement. But it's more than just not agreement. It's a loss of mutual respect. When we start viewing each other as opponents or enemies, and that's one of the things that I see that's been changing in the last few years in the United States. Rather than having oppositional ideas, we become opponents to one another. And in that kind of a situation, you can't succeed. A conquest is when a nation has not prepared the resources and the people to defend itself, when a nation has not allocated resources or allocated the will. Now, there's an old saying, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. People will defend tooth and nail what they believe in. And I think we saw that in the Revolutionary War, where you had folks that were fighting who were ill-trained and underarmed, but man, did they have a zeal for what they were fighting for. And to a man, almost, everyone felt that zeal the same way. That's a tough opponent to defeat, kind of like the Japanese in World War II. So when a nation has not developed the resources, both in people and in armaments, but most importantly, the will to protect and to fight for what we believe in. Again, not territory, not governments, but what we believe in. When a nation doesn't do that, it's become arrogant or entitled. When the people will not defend the government, then you've got a problem. When they don't, their heart's not in it, so to speak. And I think in the wars, and I would argue progressively since World War II, you have found the heart of the American people less and less and less in the wars. But I think one of the things that has been misunderstood is so often leaders look back at the days of heroes, and talk about America and how united we are and the American way and all that, and they forget where that courage came from, where that willingness to die for God and King came from, and where it came from was God. So if we look at the difference between Korea and Japan, they had very much internalized the principles, the beliefs, the honor to ancestors, regardless of who the emperor was. And understand, they were as submissive to the emperor, but they believed in the whole system. They were willing to fight, even to the point of suicidally, in order to protect that. But that fabric can be broken. What holds people together tends to be common beliefs, common goals, common mores and ethics, and the foundation to go to for revival or correction. In other words, when what holds people together is when they see they are getting off course or their priorities are getting mixed up, there's a foundation there that can bring about revival. Or we need to get back to doing this, or we need to do this better, or whatever. So there's a basis for correction. Without a mooring, without that foundation, and that foundation can't change from week to week or month to month or year to year or trend to trend. Or you end up in a situation like Germany, where we've had a regime change, and I don't know what to do with this guy Hitler. So I'm gonna go to war because I've been drafted. I'm gonna fight because I'm under orders to do so. But when the time comes to put my life on the line, I'm gonna be reticent to do that because I don't know that I believe in him. If you don't have a foundation that everyone buys into, and that foundation historically in the United States has been our Judeo-Christian heritage, our laws that are based on that. So when those begin to fall apart, when there are no longer common goals, common beliefs, common mores and ethics, then the fabric begins to disintegrate, to come apart. It's analogy I used before of having a fruit salad versus a fruit smoothie. A fruit salad, you can put a whole bunch of things in a bowl and put in some sour cream or whipped cream or whatever to mix them together, and you can have chunks of grapes and oranges and peaches and all of that, but you can go back and pick out the oranges and the peaches, etc. They're together in the same bowl, but they're not united. They're together, but they're not sharing the same purpose. Now, you put all that in a blender and blend it, you can no longer separate the fruits. You can't separate because they've all given their lives to unite to a common purpose or a common goal, and that's to create a smoothie. So once they're united, they're indivisible. Whereas in a fruit salad, division is possible. When I ate fruit salad as a kid, I would pick out parts of it. I practiced division in fruit salad. Now, where we are as a nation, it's very evident that we are a fruit salad because we're in a bowl together, we're turning on one another. We're fighting within this salad. Americans have grown to see one another as enemies, not respectfully disagreeing with someone, but seeing them as you're the enemy, you're the problem. Once Republicans and Democrats varied on how to achieve common goals. You see, 50 years ago, our Judeo-Christian heritage was assumed. I mean, we're going to do right. We're going to do right by God. Now, how to do right by God, they would disagree on. But because of their godliness, because of their buying into God's mores, they do not view one another as enemies. Now, would they get on each other's nerves? Absolutely. And that's true in any family, any group that's together. Folks are going to get on each other's nerves. But at the end of the day, what holds them together? We've got that same foundation. So you would see in our government, you would see one called my esteemed colleague, to someone he may disagree with on seemingly everything, but he views him with respect because of the whole foundation of what holds us together. What holds us together, we're all trying to do the same thing. We're trying to take care of what God has told us to take care of, but we're disagreeing on how to do that. So in our nation before, we had a situation where we made enemies of one another, and 620,000 Americans died when we became enemies with one another over an ethic, over a moray that we disagreed with, to the point that we gave up on trying to convince one another and went to war with one another. In other words, the problem wasn't the problem. We, the other side, was the problem. So Americans were divided, and 620,000 of us died needlessly, except for the fact that we were a divided nation. And we call that the Civil War. So what holds people together is that commonality. In Luke chapter 11, verse 14, and he, Jesus, was casting out a demon, and it was dumb. And it came about that when the demon had gone out, the dumb man spoke. And the multitudes marveled. But some of them said, he casts out demons by his Beelzebub, the ruler of the demons. And others, to test him, were demanding of him a sign from heaven. But he knew their thoughts and said to them, any kingdom divided against itself is laid waste, and a house divided against itself falls. And if Satan also is divided against himself, how shall his kingdom stand? And if I by Beelzebub cast out demons, by whom do your sons cast them out? Consequently, they shall be your judges. But if I cast out demons by the finger of God, then the kingdom of God has come upon you. There's two metaphors that he gives here. And this is, Jesus spoke following the Jewish parallelism of poetry. Any kingdom divided by itself is waste. A house divided by itself will fall. So the subject and the verb is said twice, but you use two different subjects and two different verbs. And that's Jewish parallelism. You'll find in Psalms and some in the Proverbs, etc., that we're going to reiterate something as a learning tool, but the second kind of expands the first. So we have two metaphors that he's given. A kingdom divided against itself is laid waste. A house divided against itself falls. So these are the two metaphors that he's given. He's given that of a spiritual warfare. This is not just true in the church, it's not true of Judaism. He was accused of casting out demons in the name of Beelzebub. He says this is ridiculous. If Beelzebub turns on himself, if demons are casting out demons, or the king of demons is casting out demons, then he's going to fall. Now, guys, I'll be honest with you. For a long time when I was younger, that was confusing to me because I could see Satan kind of doing these things as trickery because, you know, he's the father of lies and deception. But I want us to get into that into a little bit more in a moment because it's very important to understand this division and what Jesus was saying about it. Now, in Luke chapter 11, verse 14, we have the same description, a parallel passage, and also Matthew chapter 12. Matthew chapter 12, and there was brought to him a demon-possessed man who was blind and dumb, and he healed him so that the dumb man spoke and saw. And all the multitudes were amazed and began to say, this man cannot be the son of David, can he? And when the Pharisees heard it, they said, this man casts out demons only by Beelzebub, the ruler of the demons. And knowing their thoughts, he said to them, any kingdom divided against itself is laid waste, and any city or house divided against itself shall not stand. And if Satan casts out Satan, he is divided against himself. How then shall his kingdom stand? Now, to understand, it's very important we understand what he's teaching us about Satan, because this gets at the core of the application of what we're talking about. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But first, look at the parallelism again. In Matthew's account, adds another word. Any kingdom divided against itself is laid waste. Any city or house divided against itself shall not stand. So, using that parallelism, he talks on three levels: kingdom, city, or house. And it's important for us to understand that, because this is a universal teaching. This is not just meaning the kingdom being the church or the kingdom of heaven. This is true of any group of people who are trying to work together toward any goal. And because it's a universal teaching, it's not the church versus the real world. It's not just a warning that we need to be united as the church. We need to be united as Christians. We need to be united as Christian families. There's no such thing as real world teaching versus church stuff or doctrine. God's reality is world reality. Now, the issue is whether or not people will accept that and whether or not they'll live consistently with it. And if they don't, what's going to happen? Well, he tells them, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. In the way that you mete it out, it's the way it's going to be meted out to you. That's going to happen. It's a law. What you reap, you sow. That's a law. Now, there may be a time delay in between, because it takes a while for the fruit to come to fruition, but it's a law. God's reality is world reality. Jesus said any kingdom, any state, or any house, or any city, any kingdom, city, or house that is divided will fall. We could say nation, state, town. We could say world, nation, state, town, on all levels. We can apply this to the United States, and we need to. We can apply this to the Fort Gibson, to our government, to our Chamber of Commerce, to our schools. We can apply this to our family, because he said any house, and certainly we understand that that involves family. But we can also apply this to the church, because we also are a family. And we need to apply this teaching, because often we don't see this coming. Often we're surprised when a civil war comes about. Often we're surprised when war comes between nations. Often we're surprised when a church divides. Often we're surprised when two people get a divorce, not understanding that they're reaping what they sow, and they've been sowing for a while. And either we haven't been paying attention or we've just ignored it. And often it's the latter. Now, I want to go back to Mark's rendition, Mark chapter 3. It talked about he's casting out demons by Beelzebub. And in verse 26, Jesus said, Mark chapter 3, and if Satan is risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but he is finished. Now, as I mentioned before, I would think, well, if Satan wants to fool people, he could show power by casting out demons. Now, what you need to understand is this goes back to the very thing that I was talking about. If you're going to get your warriors to give up their lives, they got to believe in you. They got to believe in what you stand for. They've got to agree to that. There's got to be this commonality, this foundation that this ethic, this set of mores and values that we have in common. If Satan starts, and remember, our fight is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities. Principalities means layers of reign. It means kind of hierarchy, if you will. And if Satan turns on his angels, his demons, if he turns on those who are serving him, they're going to lose their trust in him, their respect for him. They're going to lose their zeal for him. He's going to undermine himself. When the leaders of any army turn on their own warriors, don't expect them to fight for you. Or if they do, expect them at the first chance they have to get out or shoot you in the back of the head that they're going to do that. So what Jesus was teaching is, even Satan's followers have to a certain degree, they have to believe in what they're doing, and they have to believe in the one who is leading them in what they're trying to do. If not, he's finished. Now look at the principle there. If the folks don't buy in, you're finished. If the household doesn't buy in, you're finished. Look at the household of any alcoholic. You're finished. because they're not buying into what you're doing. They're not buying into what, and you can be as stern and as strict and whatever, but you don't have their respect. You don't have their loyalty. You don't have their honor. So they're not going to take a bullet for you. Same with Satan. And that demonstrates if it doesn't work for Satan, it's not going to work for anybody. A divided kingdom is laid waste, Jesus said. To lay waste is desolate. It's the idea of a desert. Interesting, the word in Greek also includes someone who is totally devoid of friends and family. They're absolutely alone. This would be like a leper. It doesn't have a leper colony. Now, the divided kingdom is laid waste, but it doesn't say by whom. And sometimes we look at the instrument. We believe that one empire takes over another empire, but if you go through a study of Daniel, it's going to describe God's involvement in the major empires of the world in Daniel's time and empires that are going to come. It's very obvious that what was being revealed to Daniel was God is doing all of this. Nations are history's instruments of God for world control. In other words, to prevent anarchy. We learn in Romans that God raised we know that God raised Nebuchadnezzar. He also raised Pharaoh in the book of Romans to not only rule Egypt and create a dynasty there, but through that dynasty to form his own nation. So he was using them. He raised him to power. He does those things in order to, I think the primary goal is world control, because people who don't submit to God need external control. People who submit to God have internal control, because they want to obey. They believe in his ethics. They believe in his word, etc. So what unites nations? What unites groups? It's got to be something bigger than themselves. Some of the overriding unifying heritages of the past has been ethnics. There are folks, Japanese we mentioned, Koreans we mentioned, Chinese, Jews. There are folks who are ethnic. They share ethnicity, therefore they often share ethnocentricity, which is my nation's better, our ethnic group's better. And I think that ethnocentricity we see in the United States, but it divides us because we are really a mongrel. We don't have an ethnic heritage. It's just so divided because we're ideally a melting pot, as though, although we've talked about we're more of a fruit salad. Other things that hold a nation together is ideology, ideological unifying heritage. This is uniting mythologies, religions, traditions, our stories. We're united by our stories, our traditions, etc. Another is geography. In the past, especially, geography has separated people. You have the people that live on one side of the mountain and the other. There are a lot of things that have kind of created unity, some of them artificially, but some of them in sense of identity. The U.S. has no shared heritage or race. We're relatively recent in whoever it was that came over and discovered America. It's relatively recent history, and we're populated by people coming from all over, and we still are. Now you add to that, so we don't have common ethnicity. We didn't have a common ideology except for the kind of Puritan, the faith thing, the oppression by religious oppression, etc. But that wasn't the only influx of people. But in the meantime, we've rejected our religions. We're rejecting our common traditions. We're pulling down our statues. We're getting rid of our holidays because we're tearing our heritage apart, because we're going back and identifying we don't have commonality. And when we don't find commonality, what we find is difference. And when we focus on difference, then we start objectifying one another. We've rejected our religions, our common traditions. We are ripe to be laid waste too, because a divided house, a divided nation cannot stand. And that's demonstrated in the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. They didn't they weren't defeated by a superior army or whatever. They were defeated because nobody wanted to defend them anymore. Folks have become so frustrated and so angry and so separated ideologically from Roman emperor, Senate, etc., that I'm not going to do it. And the only ones they could get to fight were mercenaries, people that they hired. The ones that we're getting to fight in the United States are hired people. We don't have a draft. I don't know that we could. The only way I think we could reinstall a draft is under a serious threat of war, probably on our own soil. That's the only thing that people wouldn't revolt against a draft. And what that means is we don't want to fight to protect whatever. We don't want to give our lives to protect whatever, as we saw in the past. So, as we mentioned, applications to nations, to families, but also to church. We can apply house divided to church, marriage, siblings, any group of associated people, because it has to do with the objectification of the opposing group. And we have identified two groups as opposing to one another. Now the groups become the problem. When the other political party becomes the problem, then the only way to solve the problem is to destroy the other party. When racial identity becomes the problem, the only way to solve the problem is to destroy the other race or races. When a spouse becomes the problem, then you get rid of the spouse. When siblings become the problem, then Cain kills Abel. When the traditional versus the progressive becomes the problem, then the progressive try to get rid of the traditionals, and the traditionals try to get rid of the progressives. So they get rid of the problem by having separate worship services. And folks 20 years ago began to view that as a solution. Well, let's have a worship service for traditional. Let's have a worship service for progressive. That's a way we can stop them from destroying each other or running each other off. You've got division. And you feed into the division by actually making two churches out of one, and they make sure they don't meet at the same time so that everybody can have their way. In Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10, finally be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the full armor of God that you may be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, against the rulers, powers, the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. It's hard for us to continue to remember that our struggle is not against flesh and blood. We can never identify human beings as the enemy. Anywhere you've got a church split, it's exactly what happens. Anywhere you've got a civil war, it's exactly what happens. Anywhere you have a racial war, that's exactly what happens. We are enemies to one another. We cannot coexist. It's not that we haven't found a way to coexist, it's that we cannot coexist. We cannot, in the church, through the love of Christ, sit down and talk and come to an agreement. We have got to get rid of each other, which means we have to objectify each other. They're the problem, and we need to get rid of them. That's exactly what a split is. You've got a group that leaves, or a group that's sent away, and a group that stays. And you've got two churches. I am interested, right now I'm in the process of doing some non-scientific analysis of the Fort Gibson Church of Christ. One of the reasons is I want to understand why the church in Fort Gibson has been able to maintain a high level of unity, even through some very tough times in our brotherhood and some very tough times even in the Fort Gibson Church of Christ. How has this congregation been able to maintain unity? And from that, gleaning, what can we continue to do? Because we got to know what we're doing before we can decide to continue to do that overtly. How can we continue to do that in order to maintain that unity? Because I think the pressures on churches are going to grow, and I think there are going to be more and more houses divided because of growing differences of ideology, growing differences of how should the church respond to LGBTQ, how should we respond to racial issues and all of those kinds of things. And what that creates is the opportunity for division. My master's thesis at Oklahoma Christian, master's in ministry, my focus was on working with divided churches. My thesis was preaching to churches that are divided, preaching to divided churches and how to try to heal that. I went to Collinsville right after they had that lawsuit, and a church of 170 was down to about 75. Went to Ponca City of a church that had divided 18 months earlier and had not hired a preacher because it was such a volatile situation. Moved to Chickasha because two churches had merged, and there was fear among the elders that the merge wouldn't work, because you talk about the potential to division. You got two different groups that identify themselves in different ways, appealed to kind of a different clientele, if you will, different personalities among the current. We've brought them together. We've plunged them together. Not a lot of preparation went into it, except for plans of how to handle buildings and all of that. So there was concern. And because of the work that I had done, they approached me about coming and helping them make sure that this merger didn't end up in division, because a lot of times it does. Went to Houston because there was a church on the verge of division. And that was the elders' greatest fear because of the challenges the church had gone through. And, when they talked to me, their number one concern was, we don't know that we're going to survive this as one congregation. So I'm doing an informal study of the heritage and the unity of the Fort Gibson Church of Christ, and I hope to share that with you eventually. Because of my training in the progression of division, in the process of division, which I learned when I was in school, that we don't learn that very much. We don't talk to each other very much. That's why we end up surprised. That's why it seems like all of a sudden we've got a conflict, and then there's a church split. It looks like all of a sudden we have a divorce. All of a sudden we have a civil war, because we're not able to track the progression. So how do we not only build on our heritage of unity at Fort Gibson Church of Christ, how do we, in very volatile and uncertain times, kind of ensure to the best of our ability that that's not only maintained, but it continues to grow? Guys, COVID is testing that in so many churches. It's easy to create a church that is a church that meets in person and one that meets online, and they're two different groups. So what can become a way of dealing with a situation can be something that, if it becomes permanent, can actually be divisive. So some things, and I want to close with this. What is often present when you see division? Now, specifically, I'm talking about church division. Number one, there's three things that I want us to focus on. What's often present? In fact, what are things that can precipitate division or a church split or whatever? Number one is lack of vision. When there's not a united sense of who we are, where we're going, what we're trying to achieve, etc. When there is, are we making progress? Do we know what our goal is? Are we making progress toward that goal? Or are we stagnant or wandering in the wilderness? And Israel complained so much, and there was division because of the wanderings in the wilderness, because they were wandering and they were stagnant, and they didn't know what's going on, who's in charge, they didn't trust Moses, etc. Can we identify the vision, and are we united in that vision? The second thing is the loss of trust in leadership. As I mentioned, grumblings against Moses. Now, in that case, not only did, who chose Moses, his own brother and sister rose up against him. Well, are you better than we are, etc., etc. The respect that leaders have our best interest and the interests of God as foremost. So when leadership loses the trust of the people, you're going to have division. And that's what I was talking about earlier. That's what's happening in our nation in terms of political leaders, but also military leaders. So number one, lack of vision. Number two, loss of trust in the leadership. And third is division among the leaderships. Elders have to be on the same page. Elders and staff have to be on the same page. Elders and deacons have to be on the same page. And I want you to understand the division most often is a grassroots movement. It can be an age group that becomes upset. It can be, like I mentioned before, you've got progressively minded people versus traditionally minded people, and there starts being kind of a disagreement among them. And what that can do is it can lead to, well, if you've got elders that side with one and elders that side with another, or you've got deacons that do that, now we've got a full-blown problem. If there's a difference in vision between the staff and the eldership, then there's going to be a loss of respect, a loss of trust on both sides. That leads to division. There cannot be a division in a church without ultimate division in leadership. And that's often when we first start seeing it, is when you got deacons against deacons or deacons against elders, et cetera, et cetera. And often by that time, boy, we're in the middle of the lake surrounded by alligators. So division is most often begun on the grassroots, and we become aware of it when we see the division in leadership or among leadership. That leads to the objectification of the other side of the controversy that then leads to division. As long as we are able to remember our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, to understand that Satan sows seeds of division. I think he's doing that in the United States all over the place in just about every way. I think he's doing it in many churches. And I think the times have given him an opportunity to do that, because it's not just folks don't trust the government. They're learning through that to don't trust leadership. So submission becomes a real problem. And when you have submission as a problem, you've got goats among the sheep. And now we've got a serious problem. How do we prevent that? Again, I'm looking at the heritage of the Fort Gibson Church of Christ, and also want to make some proposals about how to not only maintain that in the future, but how to actually build that. So we'll get to that in the future, but I want you to understand the basic truth for all people. A house divided against itself cannot stand. If Satan turns against himself, as Jesus said, he's finished. Now we're going to see in the next few years a lot of things become finished because they're going to lose a war. I don't know who they are. I don't know where it's going to be, but we're going to see that because of the division that's present. And the cost of that will be a ripple effect to all of us. Now, we can prevent that, and that's going to be the discussion in the future as I make some recommendations based upon things I've learned from history and my experiences about how to prevent division, because every group of people is potentially vulnerable to division if we don't handle our disagreements and our different perspectives correctly. So more about that later, and I'm excited to explore that with you. We're out of time. Remember, I love you. Remember that you're always in my thoughts and prayers. I carry you in my heart. I carry you in my mind. And I'm hoping this study of essential beliefs is not only encouraging to you, I hope it's upbuilding to you. Look forward to seeing you soon. I hope you have or have had a great Easter. God bless you. I love you.